There was this one period where I didn't sleep for 2 days straight, and I felt like I was absolutely going out of my mind. Hi, I'm Essie. I'm an autistic and ADHD therapist, and today we're talking about sleep. Sleep is absolutely crucial for neurodivergence. It can affect our mental health in many profound ways. And the problem is, for many of us, we struggle with it. We have insomnia, delayed sleep onset, irregular sleep-wake cycles, a lack of restorative sleep. So we end up getting less sleep, our quality of sleep suffers, and sometimes we don't even get any sleep at all. The likelihood of having sleep difficulties is increased if you're neurodivergent, but also hypermobile. So if you've been diagnosed with hypermobile spectrum disorders or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, you're more likely to struggle with these things. But the good news is there is actually treatment for it. When I was younger, I slept pretty soundly, and I think it was in my teen years that my sleep became pretty broken. It may have been the fact that I was using a computer a lot more frequently then. I was also using it right before bed, and I was staying up late, and it was keeping my mind awake, which would interfere with my ability to feel sleepy and to get to sleep. Sleep hygiene is all about creating conditions that are conducive to sleep, and not exposing yourself to phones, tablets, and computers before bedtime is one of those conditions. If you're curious to learn more, I recommend Googling this subject and seeing what comes up. I think it's a solid recommendation to use good sleep hygiene. I didn't know about it back then. I do now, and I do implement it. But I would say if you're neurodivergent, sleep hygiene alone often isn't enough to get you good sleep. What I noticed is that when I became an adult, my sleep issues intensified, and this may be in part a result of my workaholism. Growing up neurodivergent, I felt like I was always having to punch above my weight. I became a workaholic as a result. I felt like if I wasn't good enough, maybe I could do better, and therefore I would become better or be seen as better by other people. And one of those outlets for me was my projects, work, whatever I was focusing on at that time in service of my career and career success. In my book, Neurodivergent Game Plan, I discussed the time in my life where I was working full-time. It was shift work, so I was doing irregular hours. And on top of that, I was doing a feature documentary. I was also producing a web series. I was researching trips to India and Turkey for a book I was writing. And I was also preparing to write the second book at the same time. As you can imagine, I had a pretty full plate. There wasn't a lot of breathing space for me. And I think the demands that these multiple commitments put upon me made it really hard to shut off my brain. It didn't help that every hour of the day was being spent towards some kind of productive pursuit. As an autistic and ADHDer with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, overfunctioning was my way of surviving. I was forever trying to stave off this impending sense of crisis, that something terrible was going to happen if I stopped being in motion. During this period, when I would try to go to sleep, my mind would stay awake and would race. And I also found myself going over and over events of the past day, rehashing it, or even going back to ancient history and reliving things, which is something that a lot of neurodivergents do. It's the way we process our experiences. We're trying to protect ourselves against future catastrophes, so we're rehashing the past and reliving it so we can analyze it from all perspectives and be more prepared if the situation presents again in the future. Of course, this doesn't help when you're trying to sleep. And what I would end up doing is getting up, and I would walk for maybe 30, 45 minutes. If I still felt like I had too much energy, I would go to the gym. I'd walk to the gym, and then I would start exercising and running on the treadmill. I was physically exhausted, but mentally quite awake. And I don't think the exercise helped, particularly because it was so close to bedtime. I would walk home, and then to get to sleep, I would not feel settled lying on my bed. So I'd create a kind of improvised bed on the floor with blankets, whatever I could use to create a soft surface. And something about lying on the ground would help me get to sleep. It felt more grounded, more secure. I would nod off, I'd fall asleep, and then I would get up and then climb into bed and hopefully sleep. My sleep would be quite fitful. I would wake up every hour to turn over or to go use the bathroom. In hindsight, being hypermobile and having dysautonomia meant that I was drinking a lot of water during the day, and I'd have to get up and pee at night quite frequently because I drank so much water. The problem was I couldn't stop myself drinking so much water because I was always feeling thirsty. Even though at any given time I would have a bottle of water next to me and even maybe a flask of tea, and I'd be drinking from both. When I slept, It was like I never got into deep sleep. I would very rarely dream. And when I woke up, I was feeling quite exhausted still. To use a very antiquated term, I felt hag-ridden. I would end up spending the rest of the day shuffling along, barely functional. The fact that I had such bad anxiety and depression during this period clearly correlates with my lack of sleep. Since improving my sleep, those symptoms have gone down drastically. And when I work with neurodivergent clients who present with anxiety and depression, one of the first questions I try to ask is, what's your sleep like? Do you have good quality sleep? Do you feel rested? And most of the time they report that they're having one of the many difficulties I described at the beginning of this video: delayed sleep onset, non-restorative sleep, difficulty staying asleep. All these kinds of things were contributing to them feeling exhausted, and then their mental health symptoms were rising as a result. My anxiety was so bad during this period that when I started to drift off to sleep, my body would jerk awake like I was falling off a cliff. I'd even start to see a vision of me falling off a cliff or something like this. The term for this that I found at the time was Hypnic Jerks, and I would have one hypnic jerk after the other, and the shock of waking to this fear that I was falling would stop me from even trying to go to sleep. This happened for an entire night, and it followed into the next day. I was having to go to work, and I was barely able to function, and I finally got some kind of prescription to help me sleep, and it was a huge relief. But for that period, it was like I was losing my mind. If I couldn't get to sleep, I felt like my world was ending. And maybe other people might have had less of a severe reaction. For me, the anxious mind would kind of ruminate over this thought that I was losing my mind over and over. And of course, the evidence would lead me to conclude that that was going to happen if I didn't get to sleep, which made me even more anxious and keyed up and less likely to sleep. I eventually dragged my butt to see a therapist, and they were helpful in some sense. They noticed the high level of anxiety I was experiencing, and they suggested things like melatonin, natural supplements to help me rest. I was also recommended to develop a mindfulness practice, and I tried all of these things. I tried good sleep hygiene, but I still had the same problems. It was clearly neurologically based, but my therapist at the time, I don't know if that was her area of expertise and if she was really looking for neurodivergence as a contributor to this. A friend recommended I see an alternative medicine specialist, and this gentleman practiced acupressure, and he prescribed me some Ayurvedic herbs. The herbs came in the format of a pill, but this pill also happened to contain lactose, and I'm lactose intolerant. I have irritable bowel syndrome. These pills naturally just made me sick, so I discontinued them. I saw a psychiatrist, and we tried a bunch of medicines. She prescribed me initially an antipsychotic. I'm not psychotic, for the record, if you haven't noticed already. It would make me very groggy, and I almost got into a traffic accident because I was very delayed in my processing and almost pulled out in front of a car and got T-boned. I was so desperate, I went and did a sleep study, and if you don't know what that is, they put a whole bunch of electrodes and tape wires to you, and you lie in a bed in a room at their facility, and they run tests while you sleep. The sleep specialist who assessed my results said, well, I don't know what else to do. I'm going to send you a referral for this biofeedback specialist. I called her up, and of course she didn't take my insurance, and biofeedback could cost me upwards of thousands of dollars for a set of treatments. And I couldn't afford that at the time, and I wasn't necessarily sure that this treatment was going to actually fix the problem to begin with. What I did recognize during this exploratory phase was that my workaholism certainly wasn't helping. I was working from the moment I awoke to the moment I slept, and this obviously didn't prepare me in any sense to go to sleep when the time came around. To use an analogy, I once had a phone that had suddenly stopped working. I could do the basic tasks with it, but if I tried to multitask, if I tried to open too many apps at once, it would just crash, and it was getting really frustrating. So I took it in to see a technician, and he looked at it and said that there was nothing wrong with the phone, and asked me when was the last time I'd turned it off. And I'd had the phone for 2 years, and I'd probably turned it off once or twice. And he said to me, like human beings, phones need to rest. You sometimes need to turn it off for 5 or 10 minutes. And then once you'd done that, it would start returning to its regular function. Just like this phone, human beings need rest as well. Buffers of peace between moments of productivity, opportunities to rest and recover so we can maintain optimal functioning. It was clear that I needed to drastically overhaul my work schedule and put in these moments of rest in my day. if I was to recover from my sleep difficulties. Of course, that wasn't the whole picture, and getting my hypermobility diagnosis put me on a path to seeking alternative treatments. I discovered a video with a leading expert in the field with regards to sleep difficulties and hypermobility, and he provided a list of medications he recommended using. After I got my diagnosis, I went to my PCP and said, hey, can I try using these medications? And she, to her credit, was really open-minded and helpful, and she gave me the prescriptions, and sure enough, they helped a ton. Because I'm not a medical provider, I'm not going to list these prescriptions, but what I would recommend is that if you are neurodivergent and you have sleep difficulties, research specific sleep medications for people who are neurodivergent. And if you are hypermobile, look for those as well. Some creative Googling and YouTubing will find you some pretty solid resources, and you can take those recommendations and work with your PCP to explore which combination of these medications could be helpful for you. An important thing to note is that if you are ADHD, exercise is really important for helping you burn through those extra reserves of energy. So by the time it comes to sleep, you're not all hyped up. And I found that having some form of daily exercise has helped my sleep difficulties hugely. Some people report positive and negative effects of using stimulant medications. You might, for example, have difficulty sleeping as a result of taking them. When I took stimulant medications, I knocked out really easily. I felt pretty tired by the end of the day and was ready for bed. You want to take account of how your existing medications, especially stimulants, might be affecting your sleep, and keeping a diary to monitor the effects of when you are using those medications and the impact on sleep will be really crucial to understanding the obstacles it presents. If you watch this video and you think, oh yeah, I have sleep difficulties, don't sit on this. There are resources out there specifically for you. You'll have to do a bit of digging, but if you find them and pursue them doggedly, you'll be able to find solutions just the way I did to help you get better sleep and feel more rested. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe to my channel and share it with anyone you think might benefit from watching it. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye for now.